if you have scientific optimism, oligarchy is no longer tenable. So that's one side of it. But then there's the other side. The overpopulation seems to grow out of the quest of the oligarch to find a way to define other people as subhuman or non-human. If you look around, say, Italy, right, and you look at sculpture and things you can find out in the public squares, you'll see, as I would sum it up, the oldest oligarchical trick in the book: humans and beasts, humans and animals. And one of the favorite themes of oligarchical sculptures and things like this is to have creatures that are part human, part animal. It's a very, very dangerous combination, right? You want to keep that as a bright line of demarcation, because in reality there is one. But notice, as the oligarch, most people are more like animals than they are like me. The oligarch attempts to say that the common run of mankind, the average person, Joe Sixpack, is really an animal. But the oligarch, the people of wealth and family and whatever other criteria that they may want to drag out, these are inherently superior. So that the answer to the problem that this creates tends to be the extermination of the poor, the useless eaters, the lower classes, the inferior racial minorities, of course, always a favorite target, an obvious target in this. And again, this, we can trace this back at least 3,000 years. Hesiod, not quite 3,000 years, but we can more or less get 3 millennia of a structural feature. It looks like it's an ontological feature of oligarchical thinking, that the world is overpopulated, and that at the same time technology is not available. The technology would be the wrong way to deal with this. So the oligarch says, if there are not enough hats, the answer is not to produce more hats, but to cut off heads. And that's what you see. In the years after World War II, it was hard for oligarchs to come forward with this because of the class consciousness and sense of empowerment that had been developed in the New Deal, the fact that you had powerful labor unions, you had a mass-based Democratic Party in which these unions had at least some influence. But then, as the 60s turned into the 70s, and you get Vietnam, Watergate, the Carter administration, the deindustrialization begins, the decline of the living standard begins to come in. People have less and less resistance to forms of irrationalism. So that by the end of the 60s, you have things like the Club of Rome coming forward, the Limits to Growth, the Rio Report, and then a series of conferences. The Stockholm Conference of 1972. There was a Bucharest Conference on Population in Romania in 1973, I believe. And then the one that I attended, which was the World Food Congress in Rome in 1974, November. This was at the Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO, and it was attended by Henry Kissinger. I remember sitting up in the balcony of this large hall at the EUR District of Rome. In comes Kissinger, surrounded by a crowd of about 100 sycophants, goons, and secretaries and co-workers and whatever. And Kissinger is there to give a speech about the world food supply. But the idea is, as we know from Kissinger's secret memorandum in the White House, is that the policy of the United States is that other countries must be prevented from using natural resources, and other countries must be prevented from using food stocks, because those are needed for the imperialist homeland. And that's bad enough. The world that we're in now has qualitatively degenerated, because now we don't have the Cold War anymore. We have a kind of oligarchy, which is, I think, qualitatively more insane now than it was then, because in those days it was at least the Soviet Union to represent a boundary and reality principle. Today, I think if you look at the United States, you'll see that there is a group of about 50 to 60 million people. Let's say it's about 60 million people or so, and it is therefore about 1/5 of the entire population, right? 1 in 5, 20% of everybody in this country is, I think, in grave danger of measures that can only be called genocidal, and here's what I mean. The problem in the current form starts, of course, with the stagnation of the labor market. We haven't had full employment since 1945, really. And every recession we've had has left us with a higher and higher level of structural unemployment. And that really went on all through the 90s. And of course, we see it today, right? We have really unemployment today about 25% or more. My estimate is there are about 30 million Americans who really need a job and who can't get one. So depression level. This is a depression. It's as bad or worse than the depression of the 1930s. So you got these 50 million people. In previous decades, they might have exhausted their unemployment benefits, which they had gotten under the Social Security Act of 1935 as a result of all, many, many decades of mass struggle. But along came Bill Clinton, and he decided that in order to make sure that he could get reelected in 1996, he would destroy one of the titles of the Social Security Act of 1935, which was Aid to Mothers with Dependent Children, that is, welfare. And he essentially destroyed it. And what's left is something called TANF, right? Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This is a pittance, and it's very hard to get, and it doesn't really change anything in this picture. The abolition of welfare was the worst thing Clinton did, and there were people who resigned from his administration based on this treacherous act that he carried out. All the reactionary commentators say that the abolition of welfare has been a great success. It has not. It has created a permanent class of paupers, and these paupers are in extreme poverty. We've just had, in the course of 2012, in the early part of the year, a series of statistics published about the degree of poverty that you find in these strata. You're talking about a family of four living on less than $12,000 a year. This is just unspeakable. It's not clear how anybody can do this, but somehow they've muddled through so far. But at what cost, right? And the cost is going to be seen in cognitive impairment of children who have been denied sufficient protein in their diets when they're very young. Now, that is barbarism, and it cannot be allowed. And there's no economic argument that can justify that. And there's no Austrian school hokum that can be allowed to justify that. So we've got 50 million people. They don't have jobs. The 30 million and their families, right? That's about what it is, or soon will be, and it'll be more. They don't have welfare anymore, thanks to Bill Clinton. And he didn't need to hurt people like that to get reelected. He could have defeated Dole without doing this. But as a new Democrat, he went ahead and did it. This has now created these 50 million people. Now let's see what other problems they have. They don't have medical insurance. And the Republicans, when you look at this Obamacare question, Republicans, they have their beefs about what they don't like in the Obama bill. And there's lots not to like in the Obama bill, right? The Obama bill has death panels. It has this MedPAC, Medical Permanent Advisory Committee that's going to ban technologies, and you're going to be told to die in order to defend the integrity of the system. Notice, though, the only difference between Republicans and Democrats is Democrats want to kill you with a board of people. The Republicans want to kill you through what they call the market. In other words, you'll be out there, you won't have the money for it, and you'll die that way. So this is not a very big difference. But all of these problems come to rest on the 50 million. The reason the Republicans want to abrogate and declare unconstitutional, if they can, the Obamacare, is because they don't want people to get the idea again that they have a right to medical care. And of course, we've got Ron Paul out there telling you, you do not have a right to medical care. Well, I'm sorry, Americans do have a right to medical care. And it was proposed as one of the 8 points of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Economic Bill of Rights of 1944, that you have a right to a home, to an education, to health care, to a retirement. You have a right to social insurance. You have a right, if you're a farmer, not to be crushed by monopoly competition. If you're a small businessman, you have a right not to be crushed by Walmart or whatever it is. In other words, security. And people say, well, no, that interferes with my liberty. Remember, people that are needy are not free. Necessitous people destitute people are not free, cannot be free. And this is what the libertarians seem to have forgotten.